Let me first take a moment to thank everybody, all of our participants, everyone for joining us today for this week's session, Quick Talk, AgileTO QuickTalk with Martin Aziz. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Wrangle, who without which we would not be possible. So Wrangle's been a great supporter for years. Unfortunately, we're not able to use the facility at this time, but I really want to thank Martin and the Squirrel North team for helping to step in and provide us with the technology for the Zoom meetup. And also Agile Alliance, who's a sponsor as well with Meetup. Quick overview of the format. It's a brief 15-minute talk, presentation, discussion, and then followed with questions afterwards. The questions are, you've probably seen Zoom and used to the chat. We're doing questions in this format through a Q&A. If you look on the icons, you'll see the Q&A. Please submit questions through the Q&A, and we'll be following up after the first 15 minutes with questions and answers. The chat is still there as well, but we'll be referring to the Q&A. And following this Zoom presentation, we'll be sending out a brief survey. Really looking forward to your thoughts, feedback, and also ideas for future meetups. Today's topic is business agility comes down to these 4 levers. Thank you, Martin, for presenting for us today. I first met Martin through the Systems Thinking TO. He's a sponsor for Systems Thinking and then a founder of Kanban TO. And he's been an avid participant in the community, of which AgileTO is just really happy to be a part of and bring it all together. You can read Martin's bio for more details. He's a consultant and managing partner with Squirrel North, a company focusing on improving business performance in the delivery of digital products and services. On that note, I'll turn it over to Martin, and if you're ready to go, we can kick off.
All right, thanks, Michael. It was an awesome introduction. So I pretty much don't have to do this slide. Yes. So we're going to be talking about business agility and how, imagine you had some sort of machine and there were 4 dials on it. And if you set it up the right way, you would be able to go in and set up your company, your organization with the right level of business agility. So, so let's just get started with just talking about what do we mean when we say business agility. So I have a simple definition up here. The degree to which we can effectively respond to changing customer needs. So the thing to focus on here is we're thinking about customers and we're thinking about change. So your customers are, they have some needs and maybe they will stay static for a while, but they might change as well. And how quickly can you respond to that is a sign of your overall business agility. Now, there might be other things that are important for your organization, like quality and overall fitness of your offerings. Don't get me wrong, we have to worry about those, but specifically today on the agility front, your ability to respond, what do we need to really pay attention to? So hang on to this definition as we kind of go and think about this, this dashboard. All right, so for levers, then maybe you could just imagine there's a bunch of readouts here to show where it's actually operating and you're trying to set things to the right level. So let's go lever by lever and kind of talk about what they are. So the first lever is what I refer to as your replenishment frequency. And so you want to think about this as how often do you go and make decisions on what you're actually going to do. And so all the things that you could do, I'm going to call those options. And all the things that you've decided that you will do, you'll start to do, I'm going to call those commitments. So it's really this idea of committing options into commitments. And how often do you do that? And so this is something you really need to think about. So you imagine you had this dial and you made these decisions hourly or on demand or yearly on the other side. And so it's kind of interesting. You know, my colleagues and I, we meet a lot of companies and we talk about their existing agile efforts. And a lot of times we have a conversation that goes a little bit like this. You know, we've really invested in our agility and we're delivering very frequently, maybe every week or every couple of weeks or every month or every couple of days, whatever the answer is. And this is, it obviously took a lot of effort and impressive. But then the question returns to, oh, well, how often do you make decisions on those things that you're rapidly delivering? And sometimes you get answers like, yeah, well, we have an annual planning cycle, or we have a quarterly planning cycle, and we figure out what we're going to do. And this is a very traditional way of making decisions. And so the question you might be thinking about as you think about this agility dashboard is quarterly or yearly product planning agile enough for what you're trying to do? So to kind of really zero in on this, let's use an analogy on a couple of activities that we're all familiar with. And I'm going to talk about grocery shopping. And so I ask this question a lot, and I usually get a very consistent answer on it. And so the question is, how often does the average European go grocery shopping versus the average North American? And typically the answer I get is, well, Europeans generally every day, maybe skip a day here and there, but generally every day, interested in maybe getting some fresh bread and other items that that make sense with regards to going shopping every day. And with regards to North Americans, this is more once a week on average, maybe a little bit more frequent than that, although these days maybe it's even less frequent than that. Certainly I've been stocking up. But so here's some differences, right? So if you are shopping weekly, your basket is going to be a lot bigger, right? The lady in the market, she doesn't actually have wheels on hers, but the one at the big grocery store, you obviously need wheels, and it's packed. And so what are the implications of that? And so the next question you want to think about is, who's got bigger refrigerators? And so if you think about the European refrigerator, it's this kind of compact unit. And in North America, the bigger the better, right? One door is not enough. We need 2 doors, right? And so so we got these two very different refrigerators, and what are the implications? Well, the implications are that if I had gone grocery shopping on my weekly trip, then I've pretty much set my potential options for the week. So the stuff that's in my refrigerator and my pantry and so on, I can make meals based on what's available. Now, on the smaller refrigerator side, well, I can change my mind, right? So tomorrow's a new day, and I'm going to go to the market, and I'm going to replenish every day versus replenish every week. And so if I want to have pizza on a Wednesday and I don't have mozzarella, no problem. I'll go out and get it. And so you're starting to think about different replenishment frequencies. How often am I going out and converting options into things I'm going to commit to? I am in one way or another committed to the things that are in my refrigerator. Either I'm going to eat them or they're going to go bad. All right, so I'm committed one way or another. And so the amount of things you commit to has a relationship with how frequently you replenish. The more often you replenish, the smaller the size of the things that you're committing to is. So in kind of in a knowledge work term, batch size is smaller. And the less frequently you replenish, the bigger your batch, the more commitments you have. And so being able to pivot and moving to pizza might be a bit of a challenge if you're midweek and you haven't thought to buy mozzarella ahead of time. So that's something to think about in terms of an analogy around how often you want to replenish. All right, so I've been told by my gracious host that this is the time that I'm supposed to tell everyone that there's a Q&A panel in the Zoom dialogue. And if you have questions, to remind you to use that and not the chat if you have any questions throughout the presentation, and we're going to answer them at the end. And I'm sure that Jeff will load them up with some sort of questions to trip me up, but bring it on. Let's go. All right, so So let's talk about the second and third lever now. Now, I think this is the one that people sort of gravitate towards right away. So, you think about agility, we talk about speed, right? Now, there's some nuance to that we need to really understand. First of all, speed in relation to customers, first of all. So we're talking about business agility. Customers are experiencing your business agility in terms of their perception of speed. So it doesn't really matter how fast you are within your organization. We're talking about the speed in terms of how the speed that is experienced as customers are receiving your products or services. So there is how fast did it take something to get delivered, but there's also another dimension around how predictable are your deliveries. And so to illustrate this point, let's talk about, imagine you were trying to travel from Tokyo to Osaka, all right? So these are two big cities in Japan, fair distance away, kind of other sides of the island. Now, I have some options, right? And these are two popular ones. I could take an airplane, and the maximum speed of that airplane is 930 kilometers per hour. And so it's going to get me there very fast. Conversely, I could take the bullet train, and that has a top speed of 320 kilometers per hour. So if I'm thinking about comparing speed, obviously we have a winner with regards to the airplane. But now if we think about predictability, the delays that you might experience with regards to the flight, sometimes in minutes, usually almost always in minutes. So I don't think I've been on many flights that have left precisely when they were supposed to. And frequently hours and even days sometimes. The average delay for the bullet train is 24 seconds. So it depends on what the customer is thinking. If I have a meeting that I can't be late to, as long as I leave on time, the bullet train is the better option. If I'm returning home maybe after that meeting and I want to get home as fast as possible, but delays are something that I can maybe tolerate, maybe the airplane is the best option. So when you think about your agility and you think about speed, you're now thinking about two things. You're thinking about how fast, but also how predictable. And those are two things that you'll want to understand with regards to who are your customers, what do they want, what is the product that you're actually offering. All right, and lever number 4. And this is the other one that I kind of led with in terms of the conversation that a lot of people invest in. So release frequency. How often do we want to deliver to our customers? And so again, this is about getting things in the hands of your customers. How often are you doing that? And so this is another thing that you want to think about with regards to, what is it that I'm offering? So let's compare these two products here. Should these two products have the same delivery frequency? Now, if it's the smartphone game, their customers, they want to capture their attention. They're always releasing new levels, new promotions, do things to keep their application exciting, and so it's important for them to maybe release quite frequently. On the other hand, tax software, well, okay, this year might be a bit of off year, but on a normal year, nobody cares if the tax software is released in July. Everyone's gonna buy it close to tax season, end of the year, once they know what's going on, and that's when you release it and maybe have frequent updates then, but throughout the year leading up to it, you don't need a lot of frequent deliveries. So it matters what it is that you're delivering. The other side you want to be thinking about is your customers in terms of their tolerance. So what is your customer's tolerance to delivery? So I was kind of debating whether to use this or the Microsoft Windows updates, but I've had that happen during meetings or presentations. And here is a new feature, a new service being delivered, and it's coming at you not when you want to receive it. And so you want to be thinking about your customer's tolerance to taking on deliveries as you think about how frequent I should be delivering and what is my pattern around that. So there you have 4 dials, and you now have this machine and you want to play around with them. The important thing that we need to remember, it's not about setting these things to maximum. It's really about understanding your market, understanding your products, understanding your services, and where do these dials need to sit? Am I Candy Crush or am I the tax software? Am I the bullet train? Am I the airplane? Am I about big fridges or small fridges? And so understanding your customers allows you to figure out where these dials need to be. And your next step is about understanding where you are at. So some level of inquiry for yourself. What are our processes like? What are we actually at? Let's do some measurements. And then go on your journey to move these dials to where they need to be. And so how do we do that? And very oversimplification of it in the quickest sense possible for these quick talks. To help with replenishment frequencies, you need to reduce decision transaction costs. So if you have a bunch of executives that need to get together, and you have to put together all sorts of material and business cases in order to make a decision to move an option into a commitment, and several meetings need to take place, then that's a very high transaction cost process. And so that's not going to allow you to really move the dial into a high frequency replenishment frequency, because it's going to cost too much. It's going to take too much time. So moving that dial will have the implications of examining your decision-making process and seeing whether it can be streamlined. Things like distributed decision-making, frameworks for decision-making, are these things that we need to invest in so that we can actually still maintain coherent and high quality decisions, but at the same time make them a lot quicker. In the speed and predictability side, so my bread and butter in terms of our consulting, where are your sources of delay, managing flow? What are the things that are either making your service unpredictable or impeding your ability to meet certain speeds? And then finally, your release frequency lever, you need to reduce transaction costs there. So where is your investment strategy on things like DevOps? Where is your decision-making process with regards to confirming quality and allowing things to go out? So imagine you're an organization that has CAB meetings, and you have a whole cast of characters showing up, and we have to talk about this and that, and it happens maybe every week or every couple of weeks. That's going to add transaction costs. So it's going to, allow you to get to a certain frequency of releases. But if you wanted to move the dial a little bit faster, obviously you're going to have to go and say, well, how do we speed things up? We don't necessarily want to sacrifice quality, but at the same time, while managing those risks, how do we go about allowing things to release faster? And obviously DevOps has a lot of answers for that sort of thing. So there are your dials. And now I'm supposed to pass it on to Jeff so he can grill me with a few questions.
That was awesome, Martin. That was a great walk through those. Just a reminder, folks, that there is a Q&A button down at the bottom of Zoom. If you have a question that you'd like answered, please feel free to type it in. There actually is a question in there that I'd love to start with, Martin, that comes from Peter, and it was on my mind as well. And his question is really, where have you seen the most congruent dials to focus on what a customer wants? But what I really love is, do you have an example of an organization or somewhere that's done this really well? How were they able to get there?
Yeah, so I don't think there is a specific locked congruent pattern with regards to the 4 dials. So one of the dangers I would say to people is don't have an expert come in and tell you where the dials need to be, right? Unless that person knows your business or has spent the time to understand your business, that's a time that you would respect their position. So no outsider is going to be able to tell you, this is where the dials need to be, especially if they are new to your business and don't understand your customers well enough. So there is no real secret trick in terms of this is best practice. It's about thinking about what is your practice. What is necessary for your organization to compete? Are you in the bullet train business or are you in the airplane business, right? And so understanding that and your various offerings and different customers, it's a very, it's a bit of a journey in many cases where you go to organizations and they don't understand their customers well enough to answer these questions. And so we say, okay, well, before we even move these dials, let's spend some time figuring that out. Right. And sorry, there was a second question in there. Can you remind me what it was?
So there was, is there an organization that's done it well, and is there congruency in the?
Yeah. So the second part, one place I love to point to, and on our website, there's actually a whole bunch of case studies, but the one place I like to point out to a lot is Microsoft. And so Microsoft is thinking about this both from their Windows update as well as their Xbox updates. So they've been kind of looking at all four of these aspects, and I don't think they call them the way we call them, but definitely thinking about their commitment and their release process very differently. So it's not like every time there is some sort of change or improvement in your Windows operating system that Microsoft is going to go in and just push it out there, right? They're going to aggregate. They're going to think about, what is the tolerance to get deliveries. They're going to have their Creator series where they package things up. They're going to have more frequent, smaller ones, but they're basically making very decisions along these four lever lines.
That's cool. And it's funny that you mentioned Microsoft, in a large organization. In the context of large organizations like that, you often have teams that serve internal customers. And so Jim kind of raises an interesting question, is that in the context of an internal IT department where you're servicing internal customers as opposed to external, is there a benefit, or should the team apply the levers in a view of the team's abilities a little bit more so? Or should they still drive those as if the customers, the people consuming their work, are external customers?
That's a great question. And we get that a lot. So, it's important to be pragmatic, right? So not everyone, especially in large organizations, is dealing directly with customers, right? The external customers. So you want to draw the line in the sand somewhere, right? And the question is, where is the scope of your optimization? Who is, in my mind, the customer? And, if you're in an organization and they're very mature and it's all connected and everyone's view of the customer is the external customer, they maybe been doing Kanban, and so it's end to end and it's understood, great, do it. Not the case for a lot of organizations, though. And so if you can think about who are you serving internally in your organization and have that same mental exercise. So, who's consuming what we're building, right? And treat them as a customer and think of yourself as a service. So imagine you are a team and you need, new servers built every time, or new environments built every time you're building a new application, and you have to do this a lot. And you have to request that of another team. And so, as you're waiting for the application to be ready, that's a delay for you, right? So you want them to be responsive. So wouldn't you want them to know what your criteria is with regards to their agility towards you, right? So, so if you think about the lever around predictability, you would hate to work with a department where you request a server and sometimes it takes a day and sometimes it takes 8 weeks, right? You can't plan around it. So if they were to think of you as a customer, they would start to think about what is their agility dashboard looking like, and they might adjust those dials a little bit.
Cool. Awesome answer. I'm going to kind of combine two questions into one here. And the first one is, you talk about the small versus large refrigerator. I'm wondering how that works when typically a lot of this is driven off financial planning cycles, which tend to be annual budgets being set. So I'm wondering, and kind of tied into that, Horia was wondering, about how do you turn them into KPIs? How do you turn these sorts of discussions into dollar and cents? And there's a third follow-up question that ties into these, but let's start with those two maybe first.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think you know, all these organizations have different levels of maturity, right? So, you know, there is a temptation to have everything locked and loaded when we start to earmark funding, right? And so here's $10 million or whatever the figure is. And for that, we're going to get this, this, and this. And that, psychologically gives us a lot of security, and people want to hear that. And so, you may be locked into that thinking, and that might be the maturity of your organization, and that's what you have to deal with. Other organizations may try to say, okay, well, there are certain things that we need for sure. And these other things, there might be things that we will discover along the way, or we can go and swap them out. And so going back to I kind of glossed over it really quickly, but there's a whole, much longer talk around commitment and options. But organizations that can plan around options and they can delay commitment as long as possible, they're the ones who can go in and emulate the kind of the smaller refrigerator type mindset. So the idea here is that, set a budget, and those budgets is not aligned to specific commitments, but a potential range of options, and convert those options into commitments throughout the year at some other cadence other than annually necessarily. And that's kind of a more mature way of thinking about it. But obviously it's going to take some understanding about where your current organization is and where your leadership's headspace is at.
Cool. Listen, we're at time right now, but there are a couple of really great questions that I want to continue on with, if you're good to continue. Folks, if you do have to drop off and you're going to miss out on a couple of Martin's awesome answers here, please remember that there is a feedback link in the chat window John has posted, and the AgileTO organizers would absolutely love to get your feedback. So if you do have to leave, please. Thank you for joining, and please take your time to do that feedback. And for those of you that have a few more minutes, Martin, I'd love to keep going here because there's a couple of questions, and I'd love to go on if that's okay. The next one talks about delivery frequency being very much tied to product dependencies. So it depends on your product. What is it you're doing? Is that right? Is there a correlation between your product and your delivery frequency, or are there other things that we should consider?
So it's a domino, right? So, if you think about the train versus airplane example that I used earlier, so they're both in the transportation space, but then you narrow it down and you're like, okay, so people are clearly interested in transportation, but they may have different purposes in mind. And so in one case, I really need predictability. And in the other case, I really need speed, or a good combination of those two. And there may be some trade-offs. So starting to think about your product is a smart place to be, but you need to go a little bit further and think about your customers. What are their purposes with regards to using your product, right? So there's some use cases there, and so if you can think about and understand those purposes, then you will know whether your product is in fact a good experience or not, right? And so, if you are trying to compete in the bullet train space and you don't understand your customers and you're giving them a unreliable service, then you shouldn't be surprised that your competition is eating your lunch and you're not competitive. So starting with your product, yes. But one level down, how is that product going to be consumed? And that's really important.
Awesome. David asked another question. He asked this one really early, actually, in your talk back when you were talking about your first lever there about replenishment. And it made me think about going to the grocery store every day. There are environments that are set up, like in Europe, for example, there are, from what I understand, a lot more small markets as opposed to the large mega grocery stores. So there's a fixed cost for me, for example, going to a grocery store every day There's the amount of time it takes me to drive there or take the train there. There's the amount of time it takes me to queue, especially now with how long it takes to get in. So there's an overhead cost of having that flexibility. I'm just wondering, how do you balance the trade-off overhead costs with the options of the shopping on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's important, and this is really the reason why I said earlier, don't try and dial in the maximum, because you might get that balance incorrect. And so try not to repeat myself here, but going back to that understanding of your customers is why that would make sense, right? So why are there all these small markets in Europe, and why are these mega stores over here? By the way, there's a lot of mega stores in Europe now too, but so the need is there, and then the product and service offerings, not the product and services offerings, and then the need shows up. And so if you have a customer base who says, well, I need fresh baguette, it has to be fresh baguette, and the only thing I'm going to eat every morning is fresh baguette, then I'm going to tolerate a certain amount of transaction costs, right? So I'm going to tolerate whatever transaction costs that are within some threshold, and those, and that's why I have these small markets everywhere, because it's not I'm not going to go around to the other side of the city and spend an hour getting my fresh baguette. I'm willing to go 10, 15 minutes away at most to get it. So thus, I have all these small stores everywhere. So I'm going to incur that transaction cost in order to get what I'm looking for. Then you change it. It's like, oh, I got Wonder Bread, I got sliced bread. I don't need fresh baguettes, and I got toasters. And my relatives in Europe, they don't have toasters, but I do. And so we use that, and it's like, okay, well, I don't have that fresh baguette need, so obviously I'm not going to incur transaction costs for things that I don't need, right? So again, thinking about what is those purposes allows you to understand whether whatever transaction costs you introduce to get your agility levers where you want them is worth it. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be hard transaction costs, right? So as you kind of figure out your way to improve, what is your version of the small markets everywhere, i.e. DevOps, i.e. Decentralized decision-making, i.e. smarter frameworks for decision-making. So you can make those things low transaction cost too, if it's worth it for you.
Cool. A typical scenario that someone's raised, which is very often true, is when we have the divide between our business and our technology groups. And when the business owns the intake process, they want to keep that under their control. Do you have any examples of approaches that you would follow to change their mindset so that the dials can be actually moved and you can actually have those conversations?
Yeah, so it's a typical pattern that I'm sure that many of us have seen, right? So a lot of this delivery improvement tends to start with the delivery side. So the way we like to actually kind of compartmentalize things is, imagine you had a stream of work in your entire organization, and there's an upstream portion and there's a downstream portion. And the downstream portion is this, your delivery pipe. It's the kind of a big bottleneck. It's very expensive. This is where technologists, engineers are practicing their craft to deliver something. Further up, you have, it's a little bit wider. It's options, things that are maybe thought of, and ideas are in all sorts of state of readiness before those kind of two worlds interact. Now, a pattern that is relatively pragmatic is typically looking at the delivery pipe and getting a sense of flow that is managed in there. If I can get that pattern figured out, I can now start to have more mature conversations with my business counterparts in the upstream. So imagine I'm getting flow figured out, and I've got predictability, and I've been playing around with those levers, not necessarily for the entire organization, but from that demarcation point between the two pipes. I could now say, well, you know what? I am now at a level of predictability, and so every time a feature comes in, it's somewhere between 4 to 8 days. We got the track record, we got we've been doing this for years or months, and that's the way it is. So you have all sorts of options. If I'm going to give you this as maybe an SLA, what are the things that of all the things that you could be doing, what is the thing that you'd like to take advantage of that SLA capability, right? So starting to have conversations around leveraging what you've built starts to really move the lever in the other direction. But a lot of this is less about technique and tools and more about psychology and the social side. So in many cases you have to introduce new tools and new ways, but you leave the old ones there as well. And they're the security blanket, and you leave people alone with the things that they've always been doing. And so you kind of let evolution take its course, right? You start to introduce things that are a little bit better, and it's like, you could use that, but you can use this too. And if it is in fact better, over time, the less fit stuff, you don't have a conversation about it. Nobody even pays attention. It's just, why do we still have that on the spreadsheet? Nobody knows, and it's just there in a relic.
Kind of on the same thing. There's a question in here, and by the way, I love that everyone's sticking around for this. This is awesome. If you do drop off, just a reminder again of John's of the survey that John's posted the link to for the AgileTO organizers. But Martin, I just wanted to keep going on that question, because that was awesome when you talk about the fact that new metrics or new levers become prevalent. What sort of time frame do teams take to get their levers in the right place, or is it something that's continually being adjusted?
It all depends on your starting point, right? So, when I go and I consult in organizations, before even having this particular discussion, if I even have it at all, I'm spending a lot of time to understand what their maturity looks like. And there are places that, they may never get to using this because it's just the gap between their current level of thinking and this is just too wide, and we need to work on other things, and maybe it's going to get there, and it could be in the matter of years or never. There are other places like, oh yeah, why didn't we think of this? Let's start doing this tomorrow, right? And so it's a really good question that you bring up, because it's important for everyone to realize, don't go back into your organization and say, we're just going to do these 4 levers. You want to be understanding your organization well and say, is this appropriate? Is this something that we can start using as a mental model to organize how, we organize our work and our processes? And in many cases, the answer is, yeah, we're ready for this, or only parts of it. Or in other areas, it's like, well, we got to do some basic hygiene stuff first, and we're not ready at all.
Cool. Last question, and then we really will end this, and everyone will have a chance to fill out the feedback survey at the end. So the last question here comes around making the connection between pulling the right levers or setting them at the right level at the team level, and connecting those to the right levers at the organizational level. How do you make that connection between the team and the organization, especially because my bonus is based on how I perform at the team level?
Yeah, and so, this is a bit of a, is there a connection? And sometimes maybe it's not the one we're thinking about. I loved Michael's introduction, because, he talked about our time at Systems Thinking TO. So I'll give you a systems thinking answer to this, right? And so, the system, which is the thing that comprises the overall service that gets your actual customers out there, it's just not a straight sum of the parts, right? It's more than that. And so there is a real danger of, local optimization, of getting some sort of agility in teams and not actually having that translate to any kind of actual organizational or business agility. I mean, those two things are not like you do enough team agility and you add it all up, thus we are now business agile, right? They're two separate problems, and your best bet is to solve both of them at the same time. So from the perspective of the business, you want to be thinking about this levers as holistic as possible. Maybe not your whole organization, but maybe what are some services we could try out? So we offer this particular product. Maybe we won't start it with our flagship, if it's our most popular tax software, we're going to go with a niche product that's a little bit easier to test out with. But let's think about that end to end, thinking about our entire system and our service. At the same time, let's go in and also consider team aspects. And this is, more from what I typically call a sustainability pattern. So how do we go in and make sure that, as we are thinking about agility and all the various building blocks that contribute to an organization's agility, are they all healthy? So when we go in and we deal with our sources of delay and remove those or manage them, and we go in and improve our ability to deliver more frequently and have quality baked into our processes, well, that's going to take healthy, strong teams as an underpinning of all of that. So I might have a healthy view on this from a system service end, but I have no ability to put it into action because I have unhealthy teams. Or I have healthy teams, but no ability to bring it all to bear because I'm not thinking about things holistically from an organizational service oriented perspective. So I'm not thinking about my system, going back to systems thinking. So I want to have both. They're two different problems, but without them kind of working together, it's going to be hard to pull it all off.
It sounds like they're almost two levers that you have to get balanced right there between the organization and the team. Martin, if people want to get more information or get in touch with you, is there a website or something that we can go to?
Yes, thank you for the plug. Squirrelnorth.com. So me and my partners, we do videos and our articles are there. And Martin at squirrelnorth.com if you want to shoot me an email. At Martin Aziz on Twitter if you want to go into a Twitter war and debate this stuff. And so there's a lot. You type my name. I don't know. I'm not even sure if there are many Martin Azizes out there. So I'm probably the first Google result or something like that.
Just a reminder, folks, that there is a link for feedback on this session. I know we went long. The questions were fantastic, and Martin, the answers were really, really great. So thank you so much for that. Michael, back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate your help. Featured facilitator for the session, really helped. Martin, thank you. It was an excellent presentation. Really good to see you and great words that you shared. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to also thank, we've been in a quiet period and the facilitators haven't had as much to do, but I'd like to just a shout out to the AgileTO facilitators being part of the community and looking forward to that next step. We can all get back together and do some activities and games. We are Tom, John, Trish, Noel, Shingy, Duncan, and myself, AgileTO. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and look forward to seeing you all at the next session. Thank you.